The Great Revolt of Judea was an armed uprising by the Jewish people against Roman domination between 66 and 73 AD. This video will tell us more about the events leading up to this, which ended in the destruction of Jerusalem, one of the most momentous events in Jewish history. There are many reasons as to why the Jewish revolt began, involving at least three factors: religious, political, and economic. During the 1st century AD, the Jews were increasingly displeased with Roman interference in their religious affairs. The Romans had made a number of changes to the administration of the temple in Jerusalem, including the appointment of a Roman high priest. This was seen as an extremely grave move by the Jews. The high priest was the most important religious figure in Judaism, and his responsibility was to oversee the temple. The Jews saw this as a breach of their religious autonomy. The Romans, on the other hand, viewed the revolt as a rebellious movement against imperial authority. They regarded the Jews as a subversive and dangerous population, quashing the uprising with brute force. They also used a religious factor to justify their actions. The Romans alleged that the Jews threatened public order and the polytheistic Roman religion itself. The Jews resented the Roman domination of their land. Judea had been conquered by the Romans in 63 BC, and from then on, the Jews had been subjected to a range of levies and restrictions. They believed that the Romans were oppressive, treating them as second-class citizens. It is important to note that Roman control over Judea was not total. The Jews kept a modicum of cultural and religious autonomy, and the temple in Jerusalem was an important symbol of their identity. The Romans, however, increasingly exerted military and political control over the region, giving a false sense of freedom. The deep-rooted corruption of the Roman procurator, appointed by the Senate, was transferred to the local Jewish and non-Jewish authorities. The procurator, Gessius Florus, upon entering office in 64 AD, started to favor the Greek population of the city to the detriment of the Jews, who seized on the opportunity to tarnish their status. In one instance, at a local synagogue, the Jews were praying when a group of Greeks sacrificed several birds on a mound of earth by the entrance, leaving the entire building defiled. In a rage, the Jews sent a delegation to Florus to get some form of retribution. But the procurator, having accepted the payment of 8 talents to hear the case, refused to heed the Jews' complaints and arrested the delegation. Florus angered the Jewish population of his province even more after he had 17 talents taken from the treasury of the temple in Jerusalem, claiming that the money was for the emperor. Most profits from goods sold in Jerusalem markets did not flow into the Judean economy, but straight to the elite, enraging the poorer Jewish people. Judea was a destitute province beset by internal conflicts. Poverty and social turmoil fueled popular discontent. Its economy was based on agriculture, livestock, and trade. But the first was the most important economic activity. Throughout the years of Roman rule, the economic situation of the Jews only deteriorated. The Romans levied heavy taxes on them, and Judea's economy was damaged by wars and conflicts. Nero was emperor of Rome at the time. While the revolts broke out during his administration, his role was not particularly prominent, as he was more concerned with his own affairs, such as his artistic pursuits, failing to curb the conflict effectively. Nero's shambolic government allowed the revolt to gain even more momentum at first. On the Jewish side, there was no king on the throne before the revolt began, as the Roman Empire had taken over the region of Judea through clientage agreements between Herod II and the empire. In the run-up to the revolt, the Jews were divided into 2 groups: the Jewish elite and the Zealots. The Jewish elite supported the Romans and enjoyed the best that Rome could offer. This elite had most of the Sanhedrin, which was the ruling house, and supported Herod. Meanwhile, the Zealots were a group of Jews who started to emerge as a religious and political movement around the beginning of the 1st century AD. They strongly opposed Roman rule and turned against everyone, including other Jews, who cooperated with Rome. In 66 AD, the Jewish revolt against Rome started when the Zealots attacked a Roman detachment in Jerusalem. The insurrection was initially successful, and the Jews succeeded in seizing control of Judea. Emperor Nero sent the Roman military general, Vespasian, to crush the rebel armies and punish the Judean citizens. The ratio of military strength between the Romans and the Jews during the Jewish revolt was highly desperate. The Romans had a professional and well-trained army, with vast amounts of weapons and equipment. In contrast, the Jews consisted of a civilian population forced to take up arms and defend their land. The Romans had around 100,000 soldiers in Judea during the revolt. On the other hand, the Jews had an army of around 60,000. On average, each Jew would need to defeat around 2 well-trained soldiers. That said, the Romans still had great naval power, which gave them a strategic edge. The Romans also had a technological upper hand. They had more sophisticated weapons and equipment as well. On the other hand, the Jews used more primitive weapons and equipment, such as swords, spears, and bows. The war was protracted and brutal, with the Romans resorting to an array of warfare techniques, including sieges and deportations. The remaining Jewish protesters fled from Caesarea to Jerusalem. There, the Jews refused to pay taxes at the temple and took the lives of several Roman soldiers who were stationed in the city. Flavius Josephus initially led a rebel faction in Jodfat against the Romans. The Zealots succeeded in overturning Jerusalem's military garrison, a major victory for the Jewish people, as support for the Zealots grew in the city. But this feeling of Jewish dominance over the Romans was short-lived. In 67 AD, the Romans, under the command of Vespasian and Titus, captured all of Judea and defeated the remaining rebels. Following a 47-day siege, the Jewish fortress of Jodfat were now under Roman control. Josephus was captured at this point and ended up changing sides, serving as an advisor to the Romans during the revolt. The Romans then marched onto Jerusalem. Jewish leaders' expectations in Jerusalem changed dramatically from euphoria to panic. They knew that the uprising would not succeed for long and pleaded with the Zealots to surrender peacefully to save as many Jewish lives as possible. But the Zealots refused. They preempted the insurrection that would surely have taken place if the more temperate Jewish leaders had been listened to by the average person. The Zealots then publicly executed them and hung their corpses up for everyone to see. The more moderate leaders in Jerusalem at the start of the revolution in 66 AD had been put to death, and none of them at the hands of the Romans. Things were chaotic in Rome too. Around 68 AD, Emperor Nero's increasingly volatile behavior led to him losing support for his ruling position. The Senate and the Praetorian Guard were plotting his death. After Nero died by taking his own life, the new emperor, General Galba, who had previously ruled Spain, was also murdered a few months later by his rival Otho, triggering a civil conflict. In 67 AD, Vespasian, extremely popular with the legions under his command, was also acclaimed emperor. He decided to let his son, Titus, spearhead the campaign in Judea and return to Rome to claim the throne that Vitellius had usurped. Titus, now the emperor's son, had more power than ever. He and his men were bent on invading Jerusalem and laid siege to the walls in 70 AD. This would signal the city's utter destruction, and we will see more about that in the upcoming video. If you enjoyed this one, please like it and subscribe to our channel. See you in the next video.